Okay, what if you could transform a very dated room into something more kind of modern, using affordable materials and pretty low effort, just by starting with one big design choice? So that's what we're going to be kind of doing today. I used to get really anxious about making design choices and thinking I'd make the wrong decisions when remodeling and building our houses. I mean, it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of time, oftentimes a lot of money, and you don't want to make the wrong decision. And that anxiety just causes you to kind of be paralyzed and you don't make any decisions. And so what I learned is if you just make one big choice first and then play it out across the space, you really learn a lot about what you want to do, and you just start incrementally moving forward. So I'm going to take this one random space and redesign it in two different ways by starting with one big choice for each, and then we'll see which one is better. And maybe it'll spark some ideas for your own space. So I'm using Sora from OpenAI to make these renders. I've used a ton of video and image generation tools, AI tools, and Sora usually seems to give more kind of consistent results, especially for rooms and architecture type stuff. But I've also brought these into Photoshop and kind of modified some things, adjusted some color. But you're going to notice some inconsistencies between all the renders, and things change dimensionally a little bit. But they're great tools for visualizing how materials could look in a room and start making some choices. So the steps I talked about in that design framework series of videos starts with seeing the space, which just means like looking at what you've got and really identifying the problems and the opportunities in the space. So I'm just going to do a quick review of this, one photo. Normally you'd take a week or longer and really kind of live in the space and notice things. But for the purposes of today, I'm just going to see what jumps out at me looking at this. Okay. So first thing I notice is the carpet. Carpet is just so hard to keep clean. And I think more than most materials, it just gets dated so quickly. So that's probably going to need to go. These drop ceiling tiles look pretty outdated and pretty, office-y. And then this long window is pretty interesting, but the view outside isn't great. So maybe we can fix that. And then the brick fireplace, I think actually has potential, but the two-tone kind of white and gray, I'm not a big fan of. And then, drywall, especially just white drywall, nothing ever feels special or thoughtful about that to me. And then this pendant light, looks kind of 70s and 80s, not in a great way. So some opportunities there for sure. Now, the second step is finding a fix for those problems. And here's where I think a great trick is just start with one big choice, floors, walls, something major, and let everything else build off of that first choice. And so for this, I'm going to start with the flooring because I think it's really hard to make an impact in this space without changing the carpet. And I have a flooring video in which I talk about flooring options and things that we've used and considered and have really liked. So if that's interesting to you or beneficial, check out that video. But one of those materials was microcement. We used it a lot in our house. And I won't go into all the details, but microcement can go over kind of wood subfloors, concrete slabs, over walls. It's easy to clean, it's durable, it's affordable. And you can change the color of it with kind of powders or pigmented sealers. I really like it. So I think that could really work well in this living area. And I've kind of made this kind of an off-white, kind of warm yellow undertone to it. And then from that, what other choices can I make, right? Thinking about striving for simplicity. So just using simple materials, but using them really well. So I want to go with just a 1/2-inch veneered plywood to panel these walls in. And I think I could just go directly over this sheetrock. So not ripping out a bunch of sheetrock, dust flying everywhere. If anyone's done that, it is not fun. When you're putting in the plywood though, you just want to make sure you're screwing into the wall framing for that so that it's really secure. And now let's look at this kind of brick fireplace. So you could leave the brick, and I think it could totally work. But since we've already purchased this microcement for the floors, and maybe now that I've done the floors and know how it works, or I've hired someone to do them, and this little area is not much more money, I think I want to cover the brick of this fireplace with cement also. I have given it kind of a pink undertone just because that kind of feels a little more unexpected, and kind of makes this kind of 70s room feel a little bit more modern. And then for the ceiling tiles, I'm just going to paint that a darker tone in that same color family to just kind of make it fade back a little bit. And then from there, I think we can just layer in some details. So, maybe a mid-century wood kind of pendant goes here instead of this old one. And then here's kind of an olive couch that kind of has some contrast to it, but totally fits in the room. And then maybe this room could double as a place for guests to sleep, or maybe you just want another little place to lounge. So I put this day bed in the corner. And then you can add some vintage rugs for some texture and warmth and kind of to soften up the room. You can find vintage rugs on Etsy, First Dibs, and other places for really pretty affordable prices and that look great and from the 60s and 70s. So definitely, if you're looking for a rug, I would check Etsy in particular first. And lastly, I don't know, obviously, what's outside of this window and kind of the front yard it looks like. But I would think that you could make kind of a cool little seating area out there on the outside with kind of a privacy screen that would serve as a privacy area for the outside, but also for the inside. And so would block some of those views of the neighbors' houses while kind of leaving light able to get into the window and these views of the trees. And I have another video on kind of hiding things like neighbors or kind of mechanical areas if you're interested in that. Okay, so we'll call that one option A. Now let's rewind and start fresh, kind of with a different big choice. And I'm going to stick with the floors, but this time I think we're going to try a terracotta kind of colored tile. So kind of warm, earthy, I think pretty timeless, as evidenced by these houses that are older, but I think still look great. And then that choice is going to lead me to, I want to stick kind of with the same kind of warm, kind of earthy colors. So I'm going to go with a kind of mustard tone, kind of a dark mustard tone wall color. And then a brown paint for the fireplace. I'm just going to paint that white brick. And then for the ceiling, here's kind of a big one. Instead of painting those tiles like an option A, I'd cover them with just 1/4 inch stained plywood. So it's lightweight, it's affordable. You could take those ceiling tiles down, use them as the substrate, and just glue plywood panels with construction adhesive onto those and then pop them back up. And now let's kind of just flesh out with some details. So we put a bookshelf along this wall. We could add a little seating area to kind of hang out in and read. And again, maybe add a rug. And what's cool about rugs is that you can always switch them out pretty easily and kind of change the vibe of the space. And now with the exterior, I think it still makes total sense to kind of create a privacy screen here. Maybe this time, you use kind of the Japanese shishugibon style, kind of burnt wood, black wood on the outside. I'm not sure what the exterior of the house looks like, but maybe that could work. So to me, now this room starts feeling kind of more intentional, definitely not generic, like thought has been put into the materials, but it's still, pretty easy to do. And that's option B. So I think both would be very comparable in terms of cost, so very affordable, and the amount of effort it would take to change them. I think both kind of tap into this kind of 70s vibe of the room, and what I assume is probably the kind of the vibe of the rest of the house. But I think it makes it a little more modern and just more interesting to me, but in kind of two different ways. So there it is, using kind of one big initial choice to influence the rest of your decisions and kind of create two different design options for this room. And honestly, I don't really know which one I like better. I think I could totally be happy with either of those spaces. But if you have a favorite, I would love to know. Or if you had some different ideas about what you would do with the room, I'd love to know that too. So let me know in the comments.